Good evening all, and thank you for joining us this evening. I'm Professor Wes Williams, Director here at Torch, and we are delighted to host this evening's live event as part of the Humanities Cultural Programme, one of the founding stones for the future Stephen A. Schwarzman Centre for the Humanities. Tonight, we're hosting a live discussion of Greek tragedy, masterclass on film, ahead of the exciting film premiere, which will follow immediately afterwards, after this event at 5:30 p.m. Details of where to watch the premiere will be available in the live chat throughout this next half hour. I'm delighted to have very little to do tonight and effectively simply to welcome Professor Fiona Macintosh to the screen. Hello, Fiona. Fiona has been leading this project and she will tell us more and introduce the other guests this evening. Before she does, I'll just say one or two words about her. Fiona Macintosh is Professor of Classical Reception, Director of the Archive of Performances of Greek and Roman Drama, and Fellow of St Hilda's College in Oxford. That's all we need to know for now, and I can sit back and enjoy the rest of the show. So without further delay, I'll hand you over to Fiona. Thank you, and I'm really looking forward to this.
Thank you very much, Wes, and a huge thank you to Torch and everyone behind the scenes who's helped us with this launch. Of course, as all launches at the moment, it's hugely disappointing that we all can't be together in a room. However, we're very aware that there are people from much further afield than perhaps we would have had in different times. I want to start this brief half hour just by providing a little context to the masterclass that you're going to see today. The Greek tragedy masterclass today is on Sophocles' Antigone. The hope is that this is the first of many such films. It grew out of a project called Reading Greek Tragedy Online that was the brainchild of the theatre company Out of Chaos, whose artistic director, Paul O'Mahony, you're going to meet very soon. Out of Chaos ran Reading Greek Tragedy Online in partnership with the Center for Hellenic Studies in Washington. And since March 2021, really since the beginning of the pandemic, they have been staging online a reading of a Greek tragedy, one a week, and gathering huge audiences around the world. On the strength of that really, really successful program, Out of Chaos's artistic director, Paul, came to me partly as director of the APGRD, because we had, many of us, and you're going to meet my close colleague Oliver Taplin shortly, a number of us at the APGRD had participated in a few of the events as talking heads, and Oliver as the translator of a number of the plays that the company staged. Out of Chaos wanted to work with us, in part because they know that the APGRD in Oxford is really committed to the development of a number of free digital resources. We have already made some multimedia interactive ebooks on Greek tragedies, on Agamemnon and Medea. And Paul knew that there was an appetite in the wider community, both at university and school level, but also in the wider public. Indeed, the very people that were enjoying the Reading Greek Tragedy Online. He knew that free material is very hard to come by. What is available is often very costly. And his plan was to create a series of masterclasses with high spec that would be open access and really fill a very noticeable gap in digital materials relating to Greek tragedy. And I'm sure some of you know that is really not the case for Shakespeare, but particularly for Greek tragedy. So today you're going to see a short film, a masterclass about Sophocles' tragedy. You're going to meet before the film Paul, as I say, and the actors, two actors, Evelyn Miller and Tim Delap, and I think you'll find quite extraordinary actors. You will meet, as I said, one of the APGRD's founding directors, Oliver Taplin, who's the translator for this particular reading, rehearsed reading performance of Sophocles' Antigone. And you're also going to meet a leading expert on Greek tragedy from the University of Bristol, Lyndsay Coo. We're delighted that they're all here with us today, but sadly, one other person who you will meet on screen, Jane Montgomery Griffiths, is not able to be with us because she's based in Australia, and some of you may know it's currently 3 a.m. However, you're going to meet a number of people, and so for the next 20 or so minutes, I'm going to be asking various questions of the others, and we will speak until just before 1/2 the hour, and then you will be invited to join the live screening as Wes explained. So first, I'm just going to leave the floor really to Paul, the artistic director of Out of Chaos, and more particularly the director of the scenes you're going to see today of the Antigone. And he's going to, I hope, join me on screen now with Evelyn Miller and Tim Delap. And I'm particularly keen to ask you just to speak together briefly. What do you think such a masterclass can bring to our understanding of the play, especially our understanding from a kind of actor training perspective?
Thank you, Fiona, for that introduction, and thank you for everything that you've done to support this project. And I just want to say as well a huge thank you to Torch for the support that they have offered as well. It's been absolutely wonderful, and it was wonderful to be able to get into a room with Evie and Tim, because as Fiona mentioned, we've been working a lot over the last 15 months online, creating lots of performances of Greek tragedy. But the filming of this was the first time that we'd actually been together in the same space for a very, very long time indeed. So actually sort of part of the first process was just getting over the fact that we were all actually sort of real live people in one space. And to answer that question, to think about sort of the role that this sort of film can have in terms of actor training, I kind of want to open that out to Evie and Tim. And in a way, sort of a way into that, it's just to sort of, I suppose, ask about sort of what exposure you had to Greek tragedy prior to taking part in the Reading Greek Tragedy Online series, because you've both got amazing CVs, you've both worked hugely in Shakespeare and classical texts, but I just wondered sort of if you could just talk a little bit about the experience that you've had previously with Greek tragedy, and then what this experience has sort of added to what you previously knew.
I suppose I've always fostered a love of Greek myths. I had a lot of books as a child, and I also I went to Guildhall, so we had a classical training that was pretty heavily centered in, Shakespeare, and we did a number of Greek projects. But professionally, I actually haven't touched any Greek tragedies. So it was such a pleasure having really not only the finest casting of my career, playing really some of the best characters I think that have ever been written, all packed into a year. So it's been a real joy to kind of get to know them, and indeed to read plays that I'd never even heard of.
Yeah, and I'd completely agree with that. I mean, I think in England, in the UK, where we're both based, I feel like Greek. I mean, sort of Greek. The only other Greek tragedy that I've ever performed in was at school, at sort of pre-drama school days, and I was actually in a production of Antigone and played Hymen, We also did an Oedipus when I was a teenager, but beyond that, it's been a sort of a career of quite a bit of Shakespeare, and as Paul says, sort of other classical or sort of classic texts that have been adapted for the stage. And I know that Greek tragedy is still staged on the professional UK stage, but I don't think it's done enough. And I don't think, and the last year of doing Reading Greek Tragedy online has just been so wonderful, and particularly during a year of pandemic and kind of great social and seismic change for us all. It just constantly, with every single play that we read, it was just stunning and revealing and just so exciting to see how these plays still had such relevance and spoke to our time. So I think it's just been really, really fascinating rediscovering these, and I would love to do them for real on a big stage soon.
And what was it like then? Sort of, because when we've been doing the online series, it was very much sort of a very kind of rushed process of, we'd have a couple of hours here and there maybe to put something together and then sort of live stream it every week. But whereas with this, we were in a room, we were looking at just one scene, and we were looking at it in different ways as well. I mean, obviously just scratching the surface of all the different interpretations that there might be. But so what was it like then, being in the room, exploring a scene in a bit more depth, and how do you feel that can be useful for people watching in terms of thinking about the different interpretations that are available?
I think it's incredibly empowering, not only as an actor, but I would hope as someone watching or studying or just reading the text for enjoyment. I think there's something very powerful about understanding that each person who performs it will have a different take, even if they're aiming for the same thing. The very fact of their being, their body, their voice, their life experience shifts the words and how they're received by an audience. I think it's the most magical thing. And it was really exciting to just have the time to really look into one scene and to play with the plethora of different options. How that affects how it feels to play the character, the relationship between them. They're so malleable, there's so much flexibility in there. And I think that can be, certainly as an actor, when you're approaching and performing a classic text that has the heft and the formidable reputation that some of these do, I think it's a really important thing to know that your interpretation, your experience is also important in how it's received.
Yeah, I think I agree with all of that, and I think that it was really so lovely to be in a room and to be able to it's amazing actually how well Zoom has worked over the last year. I think that's one of the things about Reading Greek Tragedy online. That project was phenomenal in the sense that we were able to really kind of get to grips with these texts and these stories and these characters, and it actually, I was very skeptical as to whether you could do sort of theatre on Zoom, but it's been revelatory. It's a word I've, I think, used a few times already, but I think it's been amazing, and there's nothing like the rehearsal room and actually being there in person with your fellow actors and directors. And with this scene that we did in Antigone that you're all going to see in a minute, I mean, it's just amazing how the different ways you can play it. And I think that malleable is like such a good word. It's so interesting. You can play with the audience and it works very, very well, or you can make it very internal and kind of play with just those characters on stage. And I think we tried to do that, and that was one of sort of our big experiments with this scene. And I think the relationship between Creon and Antigone and the audience and the chorus is a very, very big part of Antigone as a play, as it is with lots of Greek tragedy, and that was really fun to play with, and I hope that comes across.
Well, it was a wonderful experience as well for me to be able to work with you both in the flesh after sort of just being on screen for so long, and it was very emotional as well, I must say, to having spent so much time together online to then actually get to see you both was really fantastic. So I want to thank you for the brilliant work that you did, and I'm looking forward to everyone getting a chance to see that very shortly. I'd also like to just thank, I'm going to hand back to Fiona in a moment, but I just want to also thank English Touring Theatre, who provided the studio space that we used in the film. And I'd also like to thank Joel Phillimore, who it's not only filmed the rehearsal footage, but then painstakingly put the edit together, which involved lots of sort of footage from the rehearsal room and then Zoom footage as well, and had to deal with a whole number of sort of different technical issues, and did an absolutely wonderful job. So a huge thank you to Joel. And I think we'll all talk a little bit later, but for now I'll hand back to Fiona.
Yes, thank you all. We'll all come back in the room in a minute, but I think now's the moment to bring Oliver Taplin and Lyndsay Coo into the conversation, because we've asked the actors and the director what they've taken away from the film, and in some ways, Lyndsay and Oliver, you're experts on Sophocles' Antigone. Have you learnt anything from this film, from this this whole experience?
Well, I think the video and the two different contrasting performances that we're about to enjoy are just such a wonderful reminder of how impossible it is to separate our interpretation of the text from its performance. I was really struck by the way that the choices made by the actors really highlighted one of the main themes that's often been observed in the scholarship on this play, which is that contrast between the public and the private, mapping onto the different ways in which they chose to perform it. And I think it's also a really good reminder that the Antigone is a play that asks us to make choices, to consider opposing characters, opposing points of view. And it's a play that has been interpreted in very different ways throughout the years and in different cultural contexts. So having that reminder of the richness and the varying contrasting possibilities that are inherent in the text, seeing that come alive through the wonderful performances, for me was just a great reminder of all the potential that lies in Sophocles' text.
I think I'd like to say that this brought home to me the crucial role of rehearsal. When I translated this, I mean, it exists as a text, but I don't think of it as a text when I'm translating it. I think of it as a play, and what I want to produce is not a text but a play. And between the book, so to speak, the printed page, and live theatre is this stage of rehearsal, and it's a crucially exploratory, working out different ways of doing things, different ways of saying things. And for me, it was such a treat to hear my words spoken by the actors and spoken in different ways by the actors, to hear them exploring it. So my greatest delight in this was having the words that I'd written down turned into sound.
I think that point about rehearsal there is so crucial, that the performance is a collaboration between all of these different readings, rehearsals, between the director and the actors, and seeing an insight into that process and the way that coalesces to create the finished product. Again, just reminds us of all the different possibilities that lie in this script.
Yes, that's right. It's absolutely, it's the multiplicity, isn't it? That there's the printed page, and it looks rather static and uniform, but it isn't. It's got potential for huge variety.
I think that's a good moment, maybe, to ask Evie, Tim, and Paul to come back and join us in what I think is quite an important conversation for the project, but perhaps for all of us, in different ways personally, and to sort of brainstorm for a little bit about where we might take this project. And you know, as Lyndsay has said, and Tim and Evie have made clear, you know, this is one scene from a huge play, and perhaps, you know, the most talked about play in the whole of theatre history, and more importantly, talked, of course, not just about by theatre people or literary people, but by philosophers, by lawyers, by people, and you know, in more recent years, of course, by psychoanalysts and feminists of various generations. So we've started very small. Where can it go? Paul, what about your thoughts first, and then we'll help you.
Well, thank you. I think that's been one of the wonderful discoveries with this, is that, I mean, this is very much sort of I suppose a pilot in terms of sort of thinking about sort of the form that it could take, and also opening up then the possibilities for what else could be explored. And it was born out of a real desire to be able to explore something even just a little bit more deeply than we were able to when we were just putting on a different play every week as part of this series. And now, you know, we've had this opportunity to explore something a little bit more deeply, but it is only a little bit. We were in that rehearsal room for 2 days. We had one day just the three of us, and then another day joined by Joel on the camera, and that was it. And it really, really does open up the sort of the mind to think about all of the different other aspects that might then come into play when we think about a performance. Tim's already mentioned the chorus, and it would be wonderful to think about how the different stagings that would be possible with the chorus. You start thinking about music and dance, and all of those elements that would end up being part of a production, which at this point we weren't able to explore, but which I feel very enthused about, and feel very, you know, I feel that there's something kind of really exciting to explore within a series which looks not only at this play, but at many different plays from tragedy, and many different characters, and the ways that we can sort of add to them in different ways in a production.
Okay, so shall I quickly go around, and it will have to be, sadly, rather quickly, ask you just to say, name a play, name something that you think we should be exploring. And I imagine that's the kind of thing also that our audience might want to respond to when they watch the film, and when they'll be invited to interact in the chat. So maybe can we start with you, Tim? Well, you've mentioned chorus. Is there something particular there, or something else that you'd like to see?
Yeah, I mean, naming a play and sort of another thing that we should explore, I think, having sort of gone through all of those 40 Greek tragedies last year, I think sort of the one, I mean, the Oresteia is the sort of the obvious, that it's just such a brilliant epic piece, and there's so much to kind of get to grips with and to understand. And I feel what we've done here and explored with Antigone, the conversations actually that we were able to have, Evie, Paul and I, sort of around the table before we actually got up on our feet to do this masterclass, was sort of so revealing. And I actually feel like that's something that I personally would love to do with the Oresteia, and sort of get to grips with, you know, a character like Orestes, or, you know, I think there are just, you know, sort of Clytemnestra is an incredible, I mean, there are just so many characters, and to really sort of explore and interrogate and just spend a good bit of time on some of those brilliant scenes from that play, you know, that's one that comes immediately to mind. Yeah.
Brilliant. Okay, Evie, over to you. What
would be Hecuba for me. I read it for the first time this year and I loved it. There we are. That's me.
and you want to play Hecuba, of course.
Of course. No, well, I mean, Eunice, really. I wouldn't want to take it off her. Eunice Roberts did the most astounding job. It's brilliant.
Yeah, yes, I remember that very well. But I think you'd make a wonderful Hecuba as well. Lyndsay, what about you? I mean, do you have a favourite play, or is there something that you feel we ought to be
Well, I think going from one of the most studied and performed tragedies, Antigone, as you said, I'd love to go to the other extreme and see some of the neglected ones. And to my mind, there's nothing more neglected than the lost and fragmentary plays. So I'd love to see a performance of some of the long fragments. And I think those would give some really great opportunities for dealing with that particular literary form. So how do you perform a bit of a speech or a bit of a scene? I'd love to see that.
Okay, gosh, yes, exciting. Oliver, what about you?
Well, I think taking up from what Paul said, the bringing in the music, the dance, the movement, that's what this is great. It's gets away from the idea that this is something fixed, that it's, you know, a white marble statue on a pedestal, and brings it alive. And what I would just like to say is, please ask me to do the translation.
Well, we have to share with you, Paul and I thought we were going to do a 12-minute film. What you're going to watch shortly lasts 42 minutes, I think. And you will see, obviously it falls into 2 parts, so you don't have to sit for 42 minutes. You know, I mean, you do now on the premiere, but after, if you catch up on YouTube. But I think, you know, Tim's got a brilliant idea about the Oresteia, but I think that's going to be a big film. Oliver, and both of you, Tim as well, you know, wanting to see choruses and music. It looks like we've got a lot of projects ahead, and some of them are very big projects. But we really need response from audiences. So please let us know where we can take this project. We're deeply committed to making resources like this freely available for everyone. And for me, it's been an absolute pleasure working with Out of Chaos Theatre Company, and also being able to not only share thoughts in a room with Lyndsay and Oliver, but above all, share thoughts in a room with Lyndsay and Oliver, 2 good friends, about the extraordinary performances that you're just going to see by Evie and Tim. So you're now going to be invited to click on the link, which will appear on the screen in a minute, and you click on the link and you will then watch with us, because we'll be with you, the live screening, and we will be there on the chat. So please interact with us, ask questions during the course of the screening that will last 42 minutes. So thank you all very much. Thank you everyone on this call for joining us, and thank you Torch for, you know, believing in this project that's been such fun to do at this really very challenging time. So thank you again. Bye.